to be able to justify what word they've chosen and why they've chosen it. So we've decided that the format of today should really be similar to how we would deliver a lesson. We give students a problem and they've got to try and solve it based on not very much information. We like them to... There's also inside in that blue folder 2 A3 sheets with 2 learning objectives on it. One for Key Stage 3 and one for Key Stage 4. Our Key Stage 3 is 11 to 14 and our Key Stage 4 is 14 to 16. And what we'd like you really to do is, this is how we plan our lessons, this is what our starting point is. And we'd be quite interested to see what you make of these, how you use this, or how you might use this to plan a lesson or plan an activity rather than a lesson, because you don't have very much time today, based on the 2 learning objectives that are in the folder. So if I could ask you to split maybe into 2 groups on the table and take 1 sheet each, and then we'll feed back together at the end. We're only going to spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes on this section. There's also in each of the folders cutouts of all the BLTS words that we use. They're in English and in Arabic, the same as they are in our classrooms. So if you could have maybe 10 minutes, having a look, I don't expect, as I said, you all to read this, but if you could have a look at it, look at these words and try and think of activities that you might use in the classroom that maybe use 1 or 2 of the words that are up on the board.
That you would say, here's a type challenge, what you do it, how can you do it?
So would we start with the events that we're looking at? Reviewing learning what's the probability to keep marking?
A lot of the time the kids will say to me, actually, do you know what, method 2 is easier than method 1.
So all the work as you're sitting here, one person will usually be either boss actually things like that. But group work at the beginning is scary until you're happy with that little work.
You can make one
or will some people just the concept what the activity was about. It can be quite difficult because we've given you lots of words, lots of ideas. But does anybody want to volunteer an idea that they've got to go with any of the cards? Would anybody like to start us off? So, for example, group learning. Who's got a nice idea for group learning? Don't all speak at once.
Good way of keeping teachers away from the class.
Group learning, do you have a group learning one?
We've got the one for probability. So we are thinking that as a group, the students can maybe roll dice and tabulate their ideas or observations they get. Or maybe they can have a card, they can have some cards and see which card comes out of it.
Doing it collectively, doing it as a group of students.
This is very general, but we have focused on the examples that we've chosen today are all statistics or data handling and probability. But you do find actually that they respond quite well to being trusted, to being allowed to go out and do those things. And if you kind of take a step back and listen to what they're talking about, the mathematical conversations, which again comes in with articulation, can be very, very rich. And it's giving them the freedom and in the way that you'd originally would have liked them to do, but they've still solved that problem. So it's just having the confidence and the trust in your students to allow them to go out and do that. This is your list of instructions. You will do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the first couple of times it may end in disaster, but the more you do it, the more used to it they become. And as I said, we are at the point now where we will give them extended tasks and send them out of the classroom, and they will very quickly get into their groups because they know we expect them to feed back at the end. It worked really successfully for us. Yeah.
The other thing I've done actually, which works really well, and I'm talking as a Year 6 perspective, just because I'm at the school, but when we do group learning, we do the self-assessment first, and I have activities, and then they choose which group they want to go to, depending on where children, and that's really personal.
That I've sat in today has been, you need to train them, you need to give them the skills that they need to move on, and that's what our BLTS words are all about. It's giving them the skills that we feel that they need to tackle mathematical problems. But we do have some statistics and probability, or sorry, it's called, in British curriculum it's called statistics and probability, but data handling and probability, some tasks to show you. So if you want to do the first one.
Okay, we're now going to get you, well, I'm going to get you to be children in my classroom, I'm sorry. What I'm going to ask in a minute is split yourselves into groups of probably 4. One person comes up and gets to look at this sheet for 30 seconds. They go back to their table and they have to try and create as much of this sheet as they can. You've got felt tips on your tables to help you do that. When the first person comes back, the second person in your group can come up and again start seeing it, and by the time they come back down, they can add to the sheet. They can talk, so for example, the first person can say to the third, oh, can you just check what's on that graph in the top left-hand corner, what was the name on there? So you can talk to each other, and that's part of it, because you're talking to each other, you're forcing your brain to try and remember as much as possible. So I use this as a revision technique. And the children do it as a bit of a race. I'm not going to get you to run up or anything like that, but you all have pieces of A3 on your table. You should all have some felt pens. So if you could split yourselves into groups of 4 if possible. If you're not a group of 4, one person can come up twice. Okay? Anybody not sure what the task is about?
Can you repeat once again?
Alright, can the first people, I'm going to have my back to most of you, so apologies for that. So can the first people come up from each group, please? Alright, first people from each group. It's always a back table.
They're cheating.
My 20 seconds starts now.
It's so hard.
Come back and write on this. Yeah, she will say. So both of them can say, and we can.
Right, go back.
Oh God!
Second set of people can come up.
I forgot.
Second set of people can come up as they start drawing. Second people.
They're not allowed to actually touch the paper.
Some people are cheating.
They put it in the back of
Which was there?
Okay, I'm conscious that we're running out of time.
This is all to do with sample space diagrams, and we try to introduce as many games as possible. Not games for the sake of games, but things that will, you know, if a lesson is fun, if it's enjoyable, then they are going to want to learn more. And this is one of these activities where you don't actually need to give them any information at all, other than what's on the board. And they'll develop very, as I've said several times today, very rich mathematical conversations. We have camels, which I laminated and cut out. And they sit down with these on the table in front of them and they rearrange them in as many different ways as possible to basically come up with this sample space diagram. And I've not told them that that's what they're doing. We've not mentioned the word it's all to do with. Go back on. It's all to do with them exploring these ideas for themselves. And this is really easy to differentiate. We start off with 3 camels, and then we have 4. And if they think they've got all of the different possibilities, they come and show me, they put their hands up, and I'll come around and check. And then I'll just say to them, there's another one, and I'll pop a 5th camel in. And it gets to the point where they're almost like, oh, if I put my hand up again now, there's going to be a 6th camel. And we just keep adding to it all the time, so that, you know, we're really pushing them and making sure that they truly understand what it is that they're doing. And when we kind of get to camel number 4, we start getting into the difficulties of have we recorded everything, and actually we now need to start doing this in a systematic way. And we never ever actually tell them that it needs to be systematic or they're going to start leaving things out. They start developing these strategies for themselves. I did this with Year 7 in October, just after we came back after a half-term break. And I was actually quite amazed, to be honest, by some of the different strategies that they developed to come up with this systematic method of writing all of these down. Because they were ways that I hadn't considered. I'd just gone for the one that I had probably been taught when I was at school. You do it and you move one each time. But they really did come up with some fantastic ideas. So that kind of then leads on to, we generally do that in one lesson where they start off with the camels, and then we start looking at different types of events that could occur, and then they develop the sample space diagrams for those. And then we move on to Camel Derby, where they each have one of these boards, and they've got markers, and they play it, and we get into a discussion about groups of 3 or 4, and all of a sudden, oh, my camel number 6 won, and camel number 3 won, and camel number, and then we start saying, oh, all the different camels will win, and then one of them will say, oh, but we're rolling dice, and they've all got the same probability or chance of being chosen. Now, I've not given them that information at all, but they're telling me all of this all the time. So we're trying to encourage them to be articulate, which would be one of my objectives for that lesson. But then we need to make it a little bit more difficult, a bit more challenging, because that's quite easy. And we start introducing the fact that our camel, we need 2 dice fairly quickly, will be the answer. And how will our rules change? The next one, things like, oh, number 7 is 1 again. Well, hang on a second, you can make the number 7 with 6 and 1. And then somebody else will say, but you can also do it with 4 and 3. And then we start getting into, well, what have we looked at previously that might help us? And without ever telling them or mentioning sample space diagrams again, they'll say, oh, we looked at sample space diagrams yesterday. And they'll start to list all, without me telling them, very quickly on a piece of paper, you'll start to see them trying to list everything like that. And at the end of the lesson, I'll say to them, right, this is purely me showing them the slides that are up there and nothing else. Asking them questions, but not actually giving them any information. And I'll ask them what happened this time when we had the race. And this is again where calculating theoretical probability. But very quickly then, they'll start picking camels 5, 6 and 7 because they've got the largest probability of occurring. And then we'll start playing the race again. Fairly quickly as well, they'll all really realise pretty quickly that camel 1 will never ever leave the starting line, because when you add the 2 numbers you never get a 1. So they very quickly stop choosing the number 1. But then we start talking about, well, camel number 11 has won a race, but I didn't expect that. And we'll start talking about the differences between experimental and theoretical probability. And that really is essentially how we deliver the majority of our statistics and data handling at Key Stage 3. Thank you for listening. And I don't know if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask of us. We've got all of these, by the way, separately, that will all appear on the website, I believe, tomorrow.